The Lord be with you, and a warm welcome to you from everybody here at Powerscourt with Kilbride. Well, I do boast a fine canopy of heavy foliage above my head from our chestnut tree here in the rectory garden, but it is not enough to suffice for good cover today, unfortunately, as we're suffering from possibly a very needed bout of rain as far as the plants are concerned in all of our gardens. Nonetheless, we will not be deterred. You are welcome to join us this morning for our usual gathering in this little square as we come into the presence of God with us and focus our thoughts a little on a specific topic for today. But first, and as always, we pause for a moment in prayer. when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. When it comes to spiritual leaders, one of the greatest spiritual inspirers, let's say, of our day, who is still very much alive, is a gentleman by the name of Eckhart Tolle. And if you have never heard his name before, I would advise you to look him up. He has written books that have been bestsellers. And he's available on YouTube, taking part in interviews. And Eckhart has led a very interesting life. At the age of 15, he stepped out of school because he felt he wasn't interested in it. And his parents were at a rocky stage in their relationship, and they eventually split up. He went to live for a couple of years in Spain with his father, who was quite a laid-back type of a character. And when Eckhart told him he never wanted to go to school again, the father said, "That's fine, no problem at all." So some way in Eckhart's life, he managed to find himself back in England doing his O-levels or A-levels and everything that was required of him to go to college, and then became an educated man himself. But what he is most known for, and please forgive me today because these are only my words and my summary of his great life's work, is being present in the present moment. And it is one of my great loves, if not my destiny, given the capacity of the work that I find myself in, to find where scripture, or the words of Christ, and psychology come together. And Eckhart speaks about the two parts of what goes on inside ourselves. When he was in his 20s, I believe, Eckhart became so totally taken over by his own mind and the thoughts therein that he really felt miserable, increasingly miserable. Until one night, a thought came into his head that he just couldn't live with this carry-on anymore. And then he suddenly said to himself, well, hold on a minute. When I say I can't live with myself anymore, what is myself made of? There's obviously somebody looking in at all of this. Eckhart speaks very clearly about our mind as separate from ourself. And I would like to add this morning something of my own words to this when I say to us about sitting back in the seat of our soul. I firmly believe myself that we are split into many parts, maybe three: mind, body and soul. And it is that part of ourselves, the observer part of ourselves, that goes on and lives on even after this body that we have ceases to be. It's the eternal part of ourselves. But stuck within the middle between our body and our soul is our mind. And Eckhart is interesting in his theory about the mind. He says the mind is not who we are. The mind is a series of thoughts that we can't quite help, that dictates a narrative about who we are and what our lives are, based on the information it has received throughout those lives. So it's circumstantial in that it is based on all of the experiences that we have had within our lives. And it's this constant narrative that can tell us untruths. I will add this myself, and we've said this many times before, you might remember in this little square. It might cause us great disharmony within our lives. How many of us have had conversations within our own minds that we would have liked to have had with an individual? Or how many of us construct within our own minds a complete story about our relationship with an individual based on a conversation we might have had that may not be true? Or assume things, or assume the way somebody else might be thinking, when we have absolutely no evidence to believe that. And yet what we think has the great potential to become our reality. So how does this speak into what Jesus says to us in Scripture? One of the things that Jesus tells us is, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father in private or in secret. And your Father who sees what you do in secret will hear you. What if going into your room and closing the door is stepping out of your incessant mind and all of its thoughts and grounding yourself in the present moment? Eckhart is very interesting on the present moment, saying that the past no longer exists, the future has yet to exist, all we actually ever have is the present moment. So how do we go, through the words of Christ, how do we go about sitting back into the seat of our soul and connecting with Him? Scriptures say to us, be still and know that I am God. It's not be still and understand that I am, or think that I am, or feel that I am. Be still and know. It's an absolute. But knowing that God is there, experiencing that God is there, requires us to turn off the narrative within our own minds and first sit back into the seat of our soul and connect with ourselves. Observe the observer. Know that there is far more to us than the different narratives that we might construct within our own lives. And when we have managed to find that place, and it takes quite a while, we do it naturally when we focus on one thing. I do it naturally when I draw, or when I actually went out into the garden the other day. When you're focused on one thing, you are totally connecting with yourself. Can you imagine the freedom for a person who has been living within their own mind or controlled by their own mind for the better part of their lives? The mind is an amazing and excellent servant, but a dreadful master. And it was refreshing to me to realise that I had been allowing my mind to create a narrative for me for a very long time that in many ways oppressed me from being the person I really was. Perhaps over the next 2 weeks, we could have a look each week at different ways in which Jesus teaches us to change our way of thinking, metanoia, change your heart, and live a more peaceful and happier life. This may be helpful to some people, it may not be helpful to others. But in all things, I would say to you, whatever spiritual masters you do listen to, first pray to God and ask Him to open your heart to what is relevant and true for you, and truth from Him. I look forward to investigating this a little bit more with you as the weeks continue.